What's the word? What's the word? What's the word? Let a few people get up in her. Christianity is fake. Prove me wrong. What do you say? What do you say? Narrow is the gate, straight is the path, narrow is the gate. I know he says something like that, like straight is the path, narrow is the gate. Man, Christianity got over 2 billion, 3 billion followers. Come on, man, make that make sense, right? Right? Straight is the way, narrow is the gate. Christianity got a lot of followers, fam. Uh, uh, in all reality, man, like when it boiled down to it, fam, like Christianity is slavery, bro. Christianity is slavery, bro. It has truly enslaved us, fam. It did a number on us. Like, here's the problem, right? Here's the issue with people in Christianity and religion, right? Now, I'm not disowning there's a God. Don't ever get that wrong. I know there's a God. I'm not here to tell you that you a God. I'm not here to say that I'm a God, but there is most definitely a God. It's just that Christianity has misrepresented this God. Now, right here's the issue, right? Here's why I get people to understand. You can go ask your grandma, you can go ask your mama, your granddaddy, your little sister, your brother, whoever deals with the church. Ask them, is the Bible, peace and blessings, peace and blessings. Ask them, is the Bible scripture? Ask them, is it history or is it both? Yep. I'm straight, man. Prove me wrong. So, if anybody deal with Christianity, prove me wrong, fam. But this is what you got to do with people, right? You got to ask, you got to ask valid questions, right? And the question is the Bible history, only scripture? Is it only history, or is it both, right? So most people would say the Bible is both, it's history and scripture. But here's the issue: people be knowing scripture, but the people don't be knowing the history behind the Bible, right? They don't be knowing the history. They don't be knowing the history behind, especially behind that New Testament, right? They don't be knowing the history. They don't even know history really on religion, right? Right? You can't tell people that that book was highly influenced by, like, you know what I'm saying, other religions. You can't tell people that. You can't tell people that that book was influenced by other religions, right? So let's deal with Christianity. Let's deal with Christianity first, right? Let's deal with the historicity of it, okay? The historicity, right? Now, I go by the name of Ebionite Hanuk, which is Ebionite Enoch, right? Or Ebionum Enoch. I'm just responding back to the person that's asked me what my name is, right? But again, let's deal with the historicity, right? Because you can try to erase history all you want, but it's always going to be somebody there that recorded, right? It's just basically about what you believe and, basically how much research that you do. Okay, there's a reason why there's a lot of textual criticism on the New Testament. Okay, all right, and I don't fully disown the New Testament. You know what I'm saying? I believe that Matthew actually is the one that composed the Gospel in Hebrew alphabet, and it's actually mutilated through the New Testament. It's mutilated. You know what I'm saying? It's mutilated through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You feel me? But I'm gonna give you some of the historicity of the New Testament, right? So, right, they remember, right? You had 12 apostles. You had 12 apostles, right? And the historicity of it is that Matthew is the only one that composed the gospel at the time, right? Of Yeshua or Jesus, Apollos, whatever you want to call him, at the time that he walked this earth, right? Matthew was the only one that composed the gospels. So that right there, you have to ask, okay, so where these other three gospels come from, as well as Revelations, right? Because all this stuff came after Jesus, right? Again, Matthew is the only one that composed the gospel in the Hebrew language, right? So where did these other gospels come from? And then you got it where they say that the Greek gospel of Mark, the Greek gospel of Mark is the first gospel. That's how you know that's an issue right there too. How can Mark's gospel come before Matthew, and Matthew was the first one to compose a gospel in Hebrew, right? So that's the first issue, right? Leave that right there. How do we only have Mark as the earliest gospel first before Matthew? If Matthew was actually there, right? Matthew was a chosen apostle. Matthew was the one that composed the gospel in Hebrew, but yet Mark is the earliest version. So what is this Matthew that we have, right? Right? So remember, right? Those who get to win the war gets to rewrite the history. So let's investigate some. Let's say this is true. The Romans come and attack, the so-called Nazarenes, right? Or the so-called Essenes or the Zealots of what Josephus was speaking about. Okay, so here's what y'all got to understand, that there was a original Gospel of Matthew that was composed that they tried to burn. They burnt it. They burned the original Gospel of Matthew, right? And it was also supposed to have been in the Caesarea library, the Library of Caesarea, right? Okay, and the original followers of Christ was called so-called Nazarenes, Essenes, and Ebionites. That's what they was called. They wasn't called Christians. Remember, to tell you in Scripture, they wasn't called Christians until they reached a town called Antioch. Okay, but they had actual names, right? And so again, Nazarene, Ebionites, or like I said, Essenes. And so what people got to understand is the best that we have on this early Gospel of Matthew, or on the original Gospel of Matthew, is actually quoted from the church fathers, right? Quoted from the church fathers, and we have all 60 fragments that came down to us. Okay, and so again, I'm just gonna leave you with that. That's something that you got to think about right there, right? You got to think about that. How was Mark's gospel the earliest gospel before Matthew? If Matthew was the one that was actually there first before Mark, you know what I'm saying? One of his chosen 12 apostles, right? But his gospel is before Matthew's. That's the first issue. The second issue is the Council of Nicaea. Let's talk about the Council of Nicaea. You cannot forget about the Council of Nicaea and what they did, right? Over 318 bishops came together. 318 bishops, right? Uh, One of the main ones that we know of as the early church fathers, Eusebius. He also spoke on James, Jesus' brother. He spoke on the Ebionites, and the Nazarenes and what such, right? Okay. So here's the thing about the Council of Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea had over 318 bishops, right? All from around the way. None of these people were Jews, right? None of these councils were real Jews, right? Let that sink in first. A council of people that came in and decided what was acceptable in canon and what was not acceptable to the canon. This is what the Council of Nicaea did. But the main reason that they came together on this was the sole purpose of Jesus' divinity, right? A bunch of pagans came together, right, and decided for us on the divinity of Jesus, right? This is the problem Christianity has, and this is what Christians don't search out to look, right? They just go to church, listen to the word, feel good, and that's it, right? But what about what about the historicity of it? Okay, so again, Christianity, right? Council of Nicaea, over 318 bishops, right? Most of them pagans, came together on the sole purpose to decide on the divinity of Jesus. Now you got to ask yourself, right? What was so important about the divinity of Jesus? Because you had opposers opposite that had a different mindset, that Jesus was just a man. And that being said, of the Ebionites, right, in the Essenes, opposed him just to be a man. So over 318 bishops came together and said, we gonna decide for y'all that Jesus came from a virgin, right? So one just doesn't wake up in the morning and say, this is just what I believe. You got to understand, at this time we're talking about a Greco-Roman era. Okay, we're talking about a Greco-Roman era, right? A Greco-Roman era that serves many gods, right? We're talking about Zeus, got all these, and all these other guys. I don't know their names, right? So we're talking about a Greco-Roman era. So these 318 bishops of the Council of Nicaea, they're coming from these polytheistic beliefs, right? Right. So it was nothing to them to decide on the divinity of Jesus, saying that he came, from a virgin, right? That he, of a Trinity, that he is God, But again, they had other opposers, right? They had other opposers, and I believe what's that guy's name? It was actually one. I think he comes from that Aryan. I think he comes from that Aryan religion, right? And I think his name is Arius. You can look him up. His name Arius is spelled Aris. Aris. His name is Arius, right? And he was the main one, like a fanatic. Like he was gonna make sure that Jesus' divinity was that he came from a virgin birth, right? So that's just what was decided on. And then on top of that, right? Let's talk about. We're gonna stick it right there. We'll jump back because I know I got some more to say. Okay, but understand this too, right? Even with the writings of Paul, you got to think about this too. Concerning the writings of Paul, I think it's like over 13 letters that's supposed to be in Paul's name. Okay, but here's the issue with that. Here's the issue with it being 13 letters in Paul's name, right? As far as Paul, they only found what you call the P46, right? That's what they found. That's what you call the P46, and which is called the Papyrus 46, right? And I believe out of the 13 so-called written letters of Paul that they claim was written by Paul today, right? I believe there was only like 6 or 7 epistles, right, that they found of Paul. So now you got to question that, right? You got to question that. If they only find 6 or 7 letters of Paul, right, in a Papyrus 46, in a Papyrus 46, the P46, right? And then I believe they found the other letters so-called that they forged the name of Paul actually 150 years later. Okay, that's another issue, right? So whose letters are you actually reading? Whose letters are you actually reading? Right? Real talk. Who letters are you reading? That's a question that needs to be asked. Only 6 or 7 letters of Paul was found. Right? The Papyrus 46, the P46. 150 years later, the rest of the letters again that was forged in his name is found. So now you got to question that. So whose writings are those? Because they're clearly not Paul's if they were found actually 150 years later, right? And then on top of that, and then on top of that, when you read the actual scriptures for themselves, right? You see that they're supposed to be writing about people in the first century. They're supposed to be writing about people in the first century, right? Um, People in the first century were not expecting a Jesus that were having that was supposed to be coming from a virgin, right? It wasn't expecting it. Even when you look in the Hebrew name virgin, virgin just actually is a Hebrew translation for young woman. That's all that is. Virgin is a Hebrew translation for Hebrew. I mean, yeah, for young woman, right? So that's your issue right there, right? So a lot of people don't understand. I'm not a full blown Hebrew expert, but I do understand certain things that I do need to understand regarding reality. And again, uh, to go and say I have to just go and say that Christianity is nothing but a polytheistic religion. Christianity is a polytheistic religion. Remember, over 318 bishops came together that were of polytheistic religions themselves. They all had polytheistic background, from Spain to Rome to Greece, all these places. Whether these people was all black, all white, or not, because we like to go to the dark ages and all that type of stuff. But again, Christianity has a dark background, and that's another reason why a lot of people, I tell people, man, gangs when it comes to gangs, gangs in the streets have nothing compared to how much blood Christianity and this religion has shed, right? Right? And then you got to think about it too, like this, right? It was 12 apostles. It was 12. It was 12 apostles, right? You have somebody like Paul who never met Jesus. Paul never met Jesus, right? And when you look at the Ebionite literature, right? Peter said that when Jesus asked him, "Who do you say I am?" Right? When Jesus asked him, "Who do you say I am?" and Peter said, "You are the Son of God," right? And what did Jesus say? For the Father, and for it was not the Son of Man that revealed this to you, but the Father in heaven. Like Peter said, this is one that was intimating that the Most High comes uh, to those when they're awake, right? So you get all your knowledge when you awake. And like Peter said when he spoke on visions and dreams in the Ebionite doctrine, like he said, when one who believes in dreams and visions is insecure, and also he can't really inquire about the things that he saw because their dream is only for a split second. And again, if you look in the scripture, the majority of the time, the Most High came to people when he came to people in visions, right? Because Paul tried to say in the Ebionite doctrine that the pious only see dreams, and Peter said no, the impious also see dreams, and he started running down a list of impious kings that had dreams uh, for acting before they acted wickedly. Like I believe that was Abimelech, right? For example, when he was that him or Amalek regarding Abraham's wife, right? And so the Most High came to him in wrath, get that man back his wife, all right? So again, the Most High comes to the wicked in dreams, and remember, he told Moses he'd come to Moses as a friend, right? And so remember, Moses spoke to the Most High face to face, all right? But all the dream-like fancy stories, we're talking about receiving knowledge through the ears and through the heart, okay? And so that's the issue with that's another reason why the Ebionite doctrine, the original Gospel of Matthew, could not be accepted with the Council of Nicaea because it went against their polytheistic beliefs. The original followers of Jesus did not have a polytheistic religion, right? One God only. You feel what I'm saying? All right, and they were against the sacrifices. So you got to remember these people that were of the Council of Nicaea. They come from the Greco-Roman background. They come from sacrificing to deities and stuff like that. They come from making men gods. You feel what I'm saying? And this is the council that decided upon your divinity of Jesus. And then you got to also look at it like this, right? Again, regarding Paul. You know what I'm saying? This is why when you go to church, you listen to nothing but Paul. They reel you in with Jesus, but the rest of the time, the most of the time you go to church, it's all about Paul, as if Paul was there. And so you got to think about it. Over 3 billion people follow Christianity over a vision that Paul had. When Christ walked with the apostles for 3 years, that's actually disrespectful, right? And so, like Peter said in the Clementine homilies, right? As far as the Ebionites, when he was talking to Paul, he told Paul, like, you mean to tell me that, one who has walked with Christ, you know what I'm saying? Should not be believed over someone who has not walked with Christ, one who sees apparitions, opposed to one who actually heard it with his own 2 ears, right? Heard him speak. They know what he smelled like. They felt him, hugged him, watched his feet, whatever you want to call it, right? Right. And so here he is, here we are, centuries later, centuries and centuries later, right? What do I need to say to get banned? I don't know what that means. Um, what? Man, these people crazy. Somebody talking about Wakanda. But yeah, man. And so that's like I say, so that's pretty much the issue with Christianity, man. Like I say, just with Paul, Paul again, they got over 3 billion followers from someone who had a vision. I mean, just think about it. Just what if I get online, and just say I had a vision? Do I deserve 3 billion followers? Again, like I asked the Israelite, not too long ago, 3 years he walked with Christ, right? So how was somebody able to get uh, how was somebody able to get what Jesus said in 3 years in a single day from a vision, right? How is that possible, right? There is no way, there is no way in reality that someone can know everything that Jesus taught from a vision, right? And then on top of that, he never quotes anything what Jesus says. I believe it may be in one place when he quotes, "Thou shalt not unalive, thou shalt not steal." I believe that's what Paul quotes. But if you look actually in Paul's writings, he doesn't quote anything that Jesus says. And Paul's letters are not to be taken as authority; they're just supposed to be taken as theology. And then if you also think about it, right? If you think about it, right? If you go and look right now, right? If you go and look, Paul always talks about grace, right? Paul is the only one that mentions grace. Grace is mentioned over 100 times by Paul in the Bible, 100 times, right? Jesus never taught the kingdom of grace, right? Jesus taught the kingdom of heaven, right? So here's what you got to understand why Paul taught grace so much. Paul comes from a Greco-Roman background. You got to remember Romans were very highly active and sexual, right? They worship a lot of gods. They ate a lot of various of meats. You got to put yourself in the place of a mind frame of this time where Paul is growing up in, right? So you have this group, this religion that's worshiping one God and doesn't believe in eating meat or eat animal flesh, right? Let me see something. It, It said that I want to start a Q and A. I was going to start a Q and A. I don't think it's let me, right? Let me see. Let me see if I can start a Q and A real fast, right? It's Christianity false. Yeah, it's not letting me do it. All right, so just forget it. It's dropping. Yeah, fam. So, like I was saying, Christianity being false again. 12 apostles, right? On top of that, Christianity has made actually two people the leader. They made Peter and Paul the leader, right? Peter and Paul. And when you look at the scriptures itself, right? When you look at the scriptures themselves, you'll find out that Peter and Paul is not the man, right? If you look at Acts chapter 15 and Acts chapter 21, you see this James, Jesus' brother. Now, even when you go to church, even when you go to church, again, it's always taught that Peter is the man and Paul is the man. You know what I'm saying? Um, and then they always tell you that Paul, was a unaliver, and that he was converted. That was never the case. That's another issue with Christianity. That was never the case. That was never the case. The case is that yes, he was unaliving, but who was he unaliving? He was only unaliving a specific group of people, and that was Paul was unaliving the so-called Ebionites, the Nazarenes. He had a specific group of people he was trying to go at, right? And these people taught a separate doctrine from Paul, right? And that's the issue with Christianity that we have. Paul was unaliving the Ebionites, the Nazarenes, and then you know ended up going under another uh, teaching another doctrine aside from Christ. A lot of people don't even realize that goes back to, like I said, Jesus had a brother named James, and Paul knew this in Galatians chapter 1 and 19, and people fail to realize that. When you go to church, churches don't teach you that Jesus had a brother named James. Remember, Mary is supposed to stay a virgin. Mary can't have kids, right? Christian theology. Notice it's called apologetics with the name Paul, and I call it apologetics, right? And so this is an issue with the church, right? This is what Christianity teaches. Christianity teaches that um, Jesus came from a virgin, right? And he loves everybody, and he's coming to save, you know, the Christian church, and everybody else gonna burn in hell, right? But then, like I said, that goes back to them saying Peter and Paul, was the man when it was actually James, Jesus' brother. And so when you find out that James was actually the man and that Paul had to follow the orders of James, that you don't get none of this in church. And so I always ask people, if James is the man, do we follow Paul or James? Did James agree? Did James agree with the writings of Paul? Remember, James was the man. James, Jesus' brother, was the man. Paul was up under him, Acts chapter 15. And then when James gives Paul the letter to what to say, after that, he gets pissed off at Barnabas and goes his way. He gets pissed off at Mark and Barnabas and goes his separate way, finds Timothy and starts teaching a separate doctrine. And it's mighty odd again in Acts chapter 15 when James tells Paul, right? Tells Paul, stay away from things strangled, stay away from blood, stay away from fornication. All right. Stay and no idols. That's what he told him. Here come Paul with his letters. Yeah, it's okay to sacrifice, it's okay to eat food that sacrifice the idols, as long as you don't believe in an idol. That's not what James said, right? That's not what James said. Paul was very hard headed. It's like, like I said, like I was telling my friend the other day, you tell your child not to go outside, and you tell your child not to go outside, and your child go and sit on the porch. That's how Paul's writings are. He hard headed. That's why it's hard to understand his writings. And it's not hard to understand Jesus. It's hard to understand Paul's writing because he's coming from a different doctrine. He's preaching a different God. Paul is preaching a different Jesus. This is what Paul is doing. Paul is the actual Antichrist. Christianity is the actual Antichrist. Paul does not teach nothing that Jesus says. He goes against Jesus' brother, and he's actually the one that stoned Jesus, right? If y'all don't even know that Stephen in the scripture, that's actually Jesus' brother James. They're trying to cover that up. There is nobody named Stephen that began as ruler as the church. The church started right after Jesus died, right? So who was the ruler over the church? It was James, Jesus' brother. Look it up. Google will tell you. Acts 15 will tell you. Acts chapter 21. It'll all tell you, right? So Stephen, there is nobody named Stephen. There was no Stephen that was an apostle. There was no, there is no Stephen that was a disciple. You know, and again, you know, he passed his throne down. He passed his throne down. Why would he pass his throne down to Peter?
All right, back at it. Yeah, phone hand ring. Sorry about that. So, like I was saying, fam, a lot of people don't know, man. Again, Jesus had a brother named James. He was the one in rulership, right? And Paul is the one that stoned him. So Stephen is actually James. Now look at the parallels, right? You have to go through the church fathers. Hippolytus was a Nazarene, right? He wrote a book. He is small. It's a smaller pack. You know what I'm saying? Of fragments. He talked about James, Jesus' brother, right? So when James got stoned, right? He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," right? And then you have in the scriptures, right, when Jesus gets stoned, he said, "Father, forgive him, for they know not what they do." If you go look in the book, if you go look in the book of Acts, what's that, chapter 7 or chapter 8, where Stephen gets stoned, what did he say? "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," right? So actually, these are all parallels what actually happened to James. All right. These are all parallels what happened to James, right? So Christianity doesn't teach that, again, that Jesus had a brother named James and he was over the whole apostleship and over the Jerusalem council, right? This is why a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls is important. The Dead Sea Scrolls actually expose the Bible, right? Because a lot of people think that these people, these apostles, was just some fairy tale. No, fam, these dudes walked a certain way. They walked in a certain light. They were very strict in their way of living. Fam, let me tell you about these cats, right? And Josephus even spoke on them, right? Right? Let me tell you. All right, I'm back, fam. Um, you gotta excuse that. So, um, like I was saying, fam, where was I at? I was talking about Paul and Paul, James being the leader of the Jerusalem Council. So, like I was saying, fam, Christianity don't even realize that, again, they're following Paul, the Antichrist. Christianity don't, boy, you couldn't imagine Christianity. Thank you, bud. Thank you. All right. Bye bye. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine Christianity teaching that Paul is the one that unalived Jesus' brother James? Could you imagine that? Right? Could you imagine that? And then again, on top of that, as far as the Council of Nicaea, again, God didn't give the council to nobody to do that. Who are you to tell me what I can read and what I can't read, right? And then here's the other issue. Here's the other issue that people don't realize, right? So I am with the council, right? I do believe that a lot of books are pseudo, right? Now, pseudo just doesn't mean a false book or a false pen, but it also means basically like an unknown author, right? That's what pseudo mean. Pseudo basically mean also to an unknown author. Cool, right? Now here's one of the reasons the council the council wouldn't allow certain books, because certain books went against Rome. So if you got these books that are saying that talks about the destruction of Rome, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls do, of course they're not going to allow these books. Again, or if you got certain books that say Jesus was a man, they not going to allow that either. You know what I'm saying? Because they're trying to push a Greco-Roman narrative, right? Again, people fail to realize, again, the type of Roman background that Paul came from. They forget that. They forget what we were dealing with. You again, do you know the type of lifestyle Romans and Greeks lived? You know what type of lifestyle? This is why grace was being so much taught, fam. Again, man, Christianity is just evil, fam. It's evil. It's evil. And here's the slavery part. Here's the slavery part about Christianity, fam. Here's the slavery part. They got you thinking, right? Christianity. Christianity got you thinking that there is a Jesus coming back. Yes, there is a God. But there is no Jesus coming back to save nobody. That goes against the laws of physics. One thing I'm learning in life that physics and mathematics is God's language. So what I mean by that, 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 1 can never equal 3, right? So what I'm saying is the sun will never dominate the night and the moon will never dominate the day. Physics and mathematics is the true language of God. It just ain't no way around it. So what you see is what you get. And so we got male and female in front of us to show us the true ways of God, right? So male needs woman to procreate. Woman needs man to procreate. Apparently, Jesus don't need man to procreate. That goes against the laws of physics. That goes against mathematics. So they had to make him be some type of deity to fit this narrative. And so it keeps us enslaved in the mind, right? From recognizing God's true will, because everything that's on this earth, right, it's always been here to benefit us. There is nobody to come in to save us. We can only save ourselves. And this is part of Jesus' teachings, that we can only save ourselves by doing what? Keeping righteous commandments. Keeping righteous commandments. And I believe that's going to be a lot of the falling away in Christianity. When people actually start realizing that nobody is coming to save you, fam. Nobody's coming to save you. No man can live a second life, crack the sky, and even the scripture say, is God's arm too short to save? So God needs help. God needs help to save. There is a God. But God don't need no help to save nobody. You got to want to be saved in order for him to save you. You got to want to be saved in order for him to save you. Yes, Jesus was real, but guess what? Not the Jesus that they taught us. The historical Jesus, the human Jesus, the prophet Jesus was real. The Nazarene Jesus, the Essene Jesus was real. But the Greco-Roman Constantine Jesus, the Constantine that said he had a vision of a cross and the cross told him to conquer, the same Constantine that had a vision like Paul, the same Constantine that had a vision like Joseph Smith, the same Constantine that had a vision like Muhammad. And Christianity got 2 billion followers from a vision. Martin Luther King had a vision. We see how that turned out, right? Fam, you said we not saved by the law, we saved by grace. Show me where Jesus taught grace. You said we not saved by the law. Show me where Jesus taught grace. Show me where only Paul spoke about grace. Paul quoted grace over 100 times because he was from a Greco-Roman world. This is why he kept saying he was struggling with his flesh, the thorn in his flesh. Paul might have even been a homosexual. Do you know that there are scholars out there that teach that Paul might have been a homosexual? Do you know how Greeks and Romans lived back then? And he just all of a sudden can just become an apostle overnight? When James' brother kept saying a double-minded man, he's talking about Paul. Paul's teachings are very double-minded. Paul's teachings are very double-minded. minded, fam. Ain't no way around it, right? I'm gonna get back on later on. I'm finna take grandma to the store. Peace and blessings, y'all.